you for the opportunity to represent the CMAP board on the CAP steering committee. This group, which had its first meeting back in June, includes experts from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors from across the region who bring a diversity in perspectives and knowledge. We are charged with guiding and informing the climate action planning process and bringing perspectives around regional priorities and challenges, areas for collaboration, and strategies for implementation. We are committed to working toward the national goal of net zero emissions by 2050 and recognize the importance of ownership for implementation, equity for impacted communities and workers. Today, the CMAP team will provide a project overview and update, share regional information around our GHG inventory and emissions, and introduce approaches to reduce emissions in the context of onto 2050 recommendations and regional priorities. We hope to engage you in a discussion on how we can work together to help our region advance existing priorities. So, Nora, thanks.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Nora.
My name is Nora Beck. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a principal and oversee CMAP's Climate Action Program, which includes the project to develop a regional climate action plan for the greater Chicago area. Today, I'm going to provide an update on our progress, highlight what we'll be doing in the coming year, and discuss a sample of greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies we are working on with regional stakeholders. But first, I'd like to set the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan for the greater Chicago area in the context of this larger body of work for the agency. In 2050, the region established a goal of a region prepared for climate change, and that to do so, we needed to intensify our climate mitigation efforts. The plan set an aggressive goal of an 80% decline in greenhouse gas emissions relative to 2005 levels by 2050. To achieve this, the plan specifically calls for the development of a regional climate action plan to further chart a path forward. It also recommends greenhouse gas reduction strategies like transitioning to electric vehicles, increasing transit ridership, and advancing renewable energy. So what is CMAP doing to act on the region's climate commitments? Two key projects are helping us to identify and prioritize effective strategies for achieving the region's climate goals. The first one is our work to develop a comprehensive climate action plan for the greater Chicago area. I'll focus on this project during the rest of the presentation. A complementary project, the Clean Energy to Communities Technical Assistance provided via the U.S. Department of Energy, is allowing us to work in partnership with two national laboratories and ComEd and the Respiratory Health Association. Together, we'll explore strategies to transition to a clean transportation system in beneficial and cost-effective ways that work in concert with our electric grid. This first-of-a-kind effort, where transportation planners and electric grid planners are working together to understand the needs and constraints of each other's systems, will be essential as we advance climate work. We're going to learn a lot from both of these projects, and we hope that they will inform and shape future regional action. Once the Climate Action Plan is complete, we'll work with you to help us identify and advance the most appropriate strategies for the region using the CMAP implementation levers that we have at our disposal. So let's dig into the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan for the greater Chicago area. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, unprecedented levels of funding were made available to advance climate work. The US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program is one such example, and it's providing planning funds for all states and metropolitan statistical areas across the country. CMAP partnered with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and our sister agency, NERPC, in Northwest Indiana to do this work on behalf of the region. And as this slide shows, we are not alone. Nearly every state and major MSA is participating in this program. That means that they are each developing their own climate action plans that are specific to their jurisdictions. As required by the US EPA grant, there are three planning deliverables. First is the Priority Climate Action Plan. And the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus developed this plan to ensure that the region was eligible for a funding opportunity. CMAP is taking the lead on the next two deliverables, the first of which is the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, which is due next fall. Before we talk about the plan components, I did want to take a moment to reflect on this large geography. The planning area involves 13 counties. It spans 3 different states and 3 different MPOs. The plan will provide a framework of strategies that outline a path to reach national goals. It will serve as a springboard for ongoing conversations and planning efforts at the board, MPO, county, municipal levels, as well as the state and federal governments. Following the plan submission to US EPA, CMAP will work with the CMAP's governing committees to learn from the process, identify beneficial paths forward, and confirm implementation action for the CMAP region. So the plan will identify strategies that will help us reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Net zero means cutting greenhouse gases from human activities to as close to zero as possible, with any remaining emissions balanced out by natural carbon sinks or removed by other means. There's also a shorter-term goal to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, 2035. These two targets are consistent with the intent of ONTO 2050 and the national and international goals to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Creating the plan will follow roughly 6 steps, and we are engaging stakeholders through the plan steering committee, the working groups, and other avenues for their implementation and technical expertise. First, we worked with stakeholders to establish guiding principles to help us navigate the path ahead. Second, we created a greenhouse gas inventory for the area to estimate emissions by each major sector. Now we are identifying strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to avoid potential negative impacts for communities. Next, we will estimate how those strategies impact emissions and create scenarios to understand different paths we could take to reach our reduction goals. Then we'll analyze how the strategies we've selected can benefit communities. And then finally, we will complete our climate action plan by the fall of next year. At the outset of this project, we wanted to establish guiding principles with our steering committee to confirm the values that they want to bring to the process and use these to guide us through potential difficult decision-making that we may encounter in the future. At our first meeting, we learned from the steering committee about their own goals and principles and how they think we should collectively approach this task. After further iterations with members, we have drafted these 4 principles to guide us. Commit to zero by embracing transformative strategies that accelerate the region's progress towards net zero emission targets. Center equity by seeking to reduce existing disparities for underserved and marginalized communities, designing strategies to maximize benefits, and advancing an inclusive energy transition. Plan for action by prioritizing actions that move the region towards short and long-term goals, and by collaborating with stakeholders to ensure the plan recommendations are relevant, realistic, and actionable. And then finally, grow a clean economy by harnessing the economic opportunities of climate action to foster innovation, create quality jobs, and position the region as a leader in the clean economy. We've shared our greenhouse gas emissions inventory in previous meetings, but I just wanted to do a quick refresh and highlight how the CMAP region compares to this larger 13-county area. In 2020, the 13 counties produced approximately 166 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And as you know, the larger Chicago region plays an important role as a national transportation and manufacturing hub. Given our existing energy sources, these activities produce significant greenhouse gas emissions and make the region a major contributor to the national emissions profile. From this map of emissions by county, you can see that higher proportions of emissions are associated with our more heavily populated areas and industry clusters. Our 7-county region makes up a majority, or nearly 70%, of the total planning area's emissions. However, there are some distinct differences between us and the rest of the area. And you can see that best in this next slide as we take a peek at emissions by sector. Just a quick orientation on this slide, our 13-county planning area emissions are shown on the left, and a subset of those emissions for the 7-county CMAP region are on the right. Just comparing the sizes of the buildings and the transportation across the 2 bars, you can see that the vast majority of building emissions, about 90%, occur within the CMAP region, and the vast majority of transportation emissions, about 82%, occur within the CMAP region. This same pattern is not true for industrial emissions, where the CMAP region has about 1/3 of the total, and the other 2/3 are in Indiana, and more specifically, Lake County, Indiana. So to reach national goals, an array of reduction measures will be needed across all these sectors. Regardless of the sector, the measures generally fall into 3 main approaches. The first is to avoid or use less energy. In the building space, this could mean improvements to the building envelope to reduce heat loss. In the transportation space, this could mean moving trips to transit, walking, and biking. Second, to use low-carbon solutions. This approach focuses on shifting the energy source to lower carbon emitting sources. That includes renewable energy, low-carbon fuels, and electrification. Switching from on-site combustion to electricity, whether it's in your home or in your car, is more efficient and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And third, sequester emissions. Natural lands and assets with technological approaches can be used to remove greenhouse gas emissions from sources that are particularly hard to eliminate via the other two options. There are synergies between all three of these approaches, and there are clear advantages of using some over others in specific locations. Our work will recognize the distinct assets and conditions in each county and the corresponding effectiveness of the strategies to reaching our goal. Well, this is the first time that CMAP is working with partners to draft a comprehensive climate action plan. Many of the strategies are not new to the agency. CMAP has been engaged and working to advance many of these recommendations for years. In the next slide, just using that same framing that I stepped through, we've identified just a sample set of measures where CMAP has already advanced implementation, either through policy research and development, programming and investment decisions, data provision, and local planning technical assistance. We've worked in these areas given the importance of these strategies for meeting a variety of other regional priorities. So as I close, I wanted to pose a question. Our role here is to make sure we lift up regional priorities and we help our communities and implementers make these a reality. How do we help our region move forward with these existing priorities? How else can we be advancing these strategies? Thank you.
Back to you. Carolyn?
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Nora. As we know, our role at CMAP is to use our levers that Nora talked about to move the needle on our regional and national climate goals. We can lean into and learn from local partners who are leading in this area, like McHenry County. The McHenry County Board's 2022 to 2025 strategic plan identifies environmental sustainability as a key issue area. They have a website dedicated to communicating progress towards their goals and the strategies and actions to achieve them. For example, McHenry County has a 15-year decarbonization plan, which includes a greenhouse gas inventory and benchmarking the county's emission sources and establishing an emission baseline. The result has been used to make significant progress on reducing energy consumption at county facilities. In 2008, McHenry County government buildings consumed 14.3 million kilowatt hours of electricity. By 2023, McHenry County facilities reduced this amount by 43% to 8.8 million. The county I represent has identified existing priorities. How do we help and support our partners and implementers to advance these? So back to you, Nora, to facilitate that.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll just share that there are lots of really great things that are going on locally across communities and counties that are already setting the wheels in motion, because as we think about reducing our energy consumption, right, there are these co-beneficial outcomes, right? You're saving costs, you're saving money, and at the same time, we're also reducing our greenhouse gas or carbon emissions impact too. And so I think the question to the committee members, whether you're in the transportation space or in the local government space, which I guess are kind of the same, one and the same as well. How else can we be thinking about supporting you all through this process? Yeah.
So just
Sure.
a thought as I think, you overall look at this whole situation, somehow we've got to get ComEd to come to the table with a plan for upgrading their system and modifying their system in order to accommodate electrification and any additional, add-ons to their existing system. I mean, from a transit standpoint, we've got that internally based upon where our garages are or whatever the case may be. But quite frankly, even moving forward, industries, they obviously know where all the industries are. What, if there is gonna be additional electrification or other demands on their system, are they prepared for it? And quite frankly, I'm looking for a detailed plan from ComEd to come forward. I'm not looking at the CEO to stand up in front of everybody and saying, we're ready, because they're not. I mean, you talk to municipalities from the standpoint of economic development and everything else, they can't even provide transformers. So I think, you know, as we look at this, an important part of it is we can do all the things that we're talking about doing, which I believe is good, but ComEd is the missing link. And without some major commitment from them moving forward, and maybe that needs to be done legislatively, I don't know, but I don't think we're gonna make a tremendous impact, you know, unless that happens. Because the companies are gonna look at it and say, well, I'm not gonna invest if if I've gotta put money in the ComEd system in order for me to accommodate this.
Mayor, go ahead.
I'd like to completely support those comments as well, but I had a good fortune in our community to be a part of a session that brought out several members of the legislature and the solar industry recently on at a facility which we're proud to have in Romeoville that is one of the largest solar rooftop installations that actually provides complete power for a manufacturing facility, which you don't hear very often. But the topic of discussion was the current efforts to support battery capacity to go along with this. You know, when we look at alternative energies, we need to be looking at the entire, not only the infrastructure grid, as the chairman mentioned, which is highly important, but things like, you know, capacity to hold when you have the ability to generate that energy source, and especially if you're on facilities that then can generate additional capacity above and beyond their own needs. And promote that not only on the small scale, but on the larger scale as well, in order to make sure that we are maximizing the energy that we're generating today, because we need to get as much as we can and hold as much as we can for high peak usage periods. But we also still need to be discussing how are we going to produce enough electricity, how are we going to get it there, how are we going to create the infrastructure to implement it, which are all important things, and it's part of this. And with that, too, on that topic, again, and I brought this up in the past, and I brought it up, thankfully, with the members of the Senate and the House that were there from the state, that the continuing desire to work more diligently on rooftop solar installations versus greenfield. We are still putting too much time and effort and seeing too much investment, in my opinion, and many of my colleagues' opinion, and destroying open green fields with solar installations rather than maximizing the ability to utilize existing rooftop space. You know, there are hundreds of millions of square feet of existing rooftop space that, with today's technology and as light as they are, that require less retrofitting and could allow us to install this. We need to find creative ways to entice the industry and those users to install those so that we're not wasting perfectly good green space when we could be doing it in a more efficient way, in my opinion. So I hope others will join me in that.
Yeah, further comments? Go ahead, Nick.
I always have a comment. Thank you. I also agree with my colleagues about thinking about kind of the use of electricity and batteries. It's kind of on a different scale for me of thinking about the unintended consequences of electrification in the sense of in the continent in Congo, you know, the strip of materials and how that has an effect. And so like what we do here and how we move forward has an effect globally, and we should be thinking about that. I know people in my generation care about that deeply. Actually, people across the generations think about that differently. Actually, let me not make that generalization. Another thing that I wanted to talk about or emphasize is kind of like the communal way of kind of like that energy saving. I know, you know, with my work in government, whether it be in Los Angeles or Chicago or now at a nonprofit, it's kind of not disingenuous, but short-sighted to just say like, oh, go get a Prius, or, you know, retrofit your home. It's kind of like, what are the communal ways in which we can think about energy saving, whether it be, you know, if it is electrification, maybe it's not about the individual, but like our fleets and how we're shipping things, right? And I agree with, like, how do we use existing buildings for solar? You know, how do we incorporate that into our development plans? I know I've worked in cities in which that is required at certain stages, and so, like, how do we explore that on a regional level? And then obviously, I've always been an advocate for equitable transit-oriented development, which also helps with that, right? And so these are all things that are more on the community level and not necessarily just on the individual level, because again, we're in the climate crisis now. We are seeing it, and each person has to do their part, but in a way that's equitable to them. So, you know, you can't ask I have an electric car, but you can't ask everybody to go get an electric car. So, like, what are the ways in which community, regardless of your status in life or how much money you make, community is contributing to that. So that would be my comment and wish. But I love the work that you all have done so far, and thank you for the report.